Just how much does your tyre choice impact your e-bike range? Can you drastically increase how far you can go on a single charge with just a simple tyre swap? Well, that's what I'm going to find out in this video to see if tyre choice alone will let me ride my eONE-SIXTY further, packing in more fun from the same amount of battery capacity. Now, tyre choice is pretty crucial for a bike, being the point of contact between the bike and the ground. Tyres give you control and grip, but their rolling resistance is also really important. Rolling resistance basically refers to how much energy your tyres soak up. Less rolling resistance and you'll go further and faster for a given effort. Now, on a normal bike, that'll translate to being less tired, but I want to find out just how significant the impact would be on an e-bike. Are we talking a few kilometres extra range, or are we talking a whole load more descents? Is it really going to be worth chopping and changing your tyres, or doesn't it matter that much on an e-bike, where a motor is doing a good bit of work for you? My plan is to hit a set test loop over and over again until the battery runs out, then change the tyres, charge the battery and do it all again. I'm going to start my test with the tyres that come fitted to the eONE-SIXTY 10K as standard. As this is a serious e-enduro bike, it needs tough, sticky tyres with an aggressive tread pattern, so that's exactly what we've fitted to it. There's a Maxxis Assegai up front and a DH2 on the rear. Both have tough, thick, double-down casings that consist of a dual layer of 120 thread per inch plies and a butyl rubber insert on the sidewalls. They both use a triple compound rubber with a harder rubber on the centres and softer edges for more grip when you're leaning over. There's this very soft Max Grip version on the front and the slightly harder but still pretty sticky Max Tyre setup on the rear. Now, Max Grip has a hardness rating of around 50A in the centre and 40A on the edges, while Max Tyre is around 60A in the centre and 50A on the edges. The tyres weigh 1,280 grams for the 29er front and 1,190 grams for the 27.5 rear. This is a mixed wheel size bike after all. My fast rolling options are these Maxxis Rekon tyres, both in the Exo Plus casing, which gets a single ply of 120 threads per inch, plus a lightweight liner and sidewall insert. At 780 grams for the rear tyre and 775 for the front, they're actually quite a bit lighter, but they both use the Max Tyre triple compound. That's combined with this much lower profile and much more closely spaced tread pattern, which is designed to work well on harder packed surfaces. We actually fit these tyres to many bikes in the E140 range as they're well suited to trail riding use. They're grippy without being draggy and tough without being overly heavy. Of course, there are a whole host of variables beside the tyres that can impact your e-bike's range, so I've done my best to control those. I'm going to be running the bike in boost mode each time, so the assistance should be fairly constant. I'll also be wearing a heart rate monitor so I can make sure that my own effort is consistent too. The tyre pressures will be checked with a digital gauge so they're as close as possible. I usually run 21.5 psi in the front and 26 psi in the rear, so I'm going to keep that the same for all the tyres here. My test loop is a consistent hard-packed surface with one big climb followed by a fast-flowing descent. I've picked a dry day, so ground conditions shouldn't have an impact, and it'll also be done all on the same day to try and keep the ambient temperature as consistent as possible. Doing this on a really hot day against a really cold day would have an effect on the battery, which would likely alter the range quite a bit. I'm going to be using the same battery each time too, just in case there are any variations there. The other thing I'll be doing is giving the drivetrain a good clean and then lube before each test run, so that any friction in the drivetrain shouldn't start to have an impact. So now all I need to do is ride round and round until the battery dies. Tough old job this. With the first effort done, it's time to switch to the Rekon tyres, get charged and start again. So on to the results. Well, while it was pretty obvious that I was always going to get more range with the lighter, faster rolling tyres, the actual difference is pretty mind-boggling. On the sticky and tough tyres, I rode for 24.4 kilometres and did 9 full climbs and descents, with the battery dying about a quarter of the way up the 10th climb. That totalled 1,135 metres of climbing, and I was riding for about an hour and 7 minutes. Now, on my fast rolling rubber, I managed 12 full climbs and descents, totalling a whopping 1,384 metres of climbing. That's around 20% more climbing on the same charge, and I was actually riding for 20 minutes and 8.5 kilometres longer. I've got to say, the reduced drag was actually really noticeable when it came to how fast the bike was rolling on the descents too. There's actually a couple of doubles there that I was really having to haul up to clear on the sticky tyres, and they were much easier to send on the fast rolling ones. So why did the tyres make such a huge difference to my e-bike range? Well, once you know a few things about how tyres are made and how that impacts rolling resistance, you'll start to understand why it's so crucial. Although weight is part of it, it's not actually as much of an issue as the actual construction of the tyre. Now, the first thing is what rubber compound your tyres are made of. A tyre made from a softer rubber will actually have much more grip as it deforms on the surfaces it's rolling over, allowing for greater friction between the two. You can actually measure rubber hardness with a durometer, and the softer the rubber, the lower the number. Softer rubber rebounds more slowly and converts more of the energy used to squish it into heat through a process called hysteresis, which also actually improves grip over a harder compound. The downside is that sticky tyres are inevitably slower rolling. The friction grip that works for you when you want to stay in control works against you when you want to roll quickly. There's no getting away from that trade-off. It's worth noting that softer tyres will also wear out much more quickly too. Now, tread pattern is another big factor. Tall, broadly spaced knobs will squish about as you're riding, and again the rubber will absorb that energy through hysteresis and turn it into heat. Having more closely spaced and lower profile tread will reduce that from happening, but once again the trade-off is that spiky, knobbly tread grips much better on soft or loose surfaces. Another key area that really impacts rolling resistance is the casing of the tyre. Now, a tyre is made up from fibres woven into a sheet, and then that's covered in rubber. The number of layers of these fibres, known as the ply, and also the thickness of the fibres, often measured in threads per inch or TPI, can add more or less friction. That's because the tyre deforms as you roll along, and if the casing is very stiff and thick, it'll actually absorb more of that rolling along energy than a casing that's thin and supple. Of course, once again, there's a trade-off, and that's that tyres that have multiple plies of thicker threads are much tougher and better at preventing punctures and cuts, even when you run them at low pressures. Of course, the casing also has a large impact on the weight, and heavy tyres do take more effort to accelerate up to speed, again sapping a bit of energy. Tyre volume also factors in here too. A larger volume tyre will actually be heavier for the same type of casing, though interestingly enough there's some evidence out there that a higher volume mountain bike tyre can actually have a lower rolling resistance. Of course, it also goes without mentioning that tyre pressure is also hugely important. If your tyres have less air in them, they'll be softer, deform more, and use more energy in the process. Pump them up and they'll deform less and roll faster. But as the deformation actually aids grip, you'll have less control. As you can see, there really is no such thing as a free lunch with tyres. Getting that balance is really what it comes down to with tyre choice. While these Rekon tyres were fine on a hard-packed, really nicely built and bermed trail centre descent on a dry day, I think if I'd picked a sloppy, slippery, rooty and rough descent to go down, it'd have been a very different story. In fact, I might not have survived until the battery was flat. The same goes for trying to do a technical natural climb with greasy rocks and roots. I think you'd really struggle on these fast rolling tyres. Now, if you can get away with some fast rolling tyres, you'll be able to enjoy a whole load more climbing and descending from the same amount of charge, which I don't think anyone would pass up. That said, on a bike like the eONE-SIXTY and the sort of terrain that you'd usually ride it on, I think I'd stick with the grippier, tougher setup for natural mixed conditions. Though maybe in the drier months it might make sense to pop a fast rolling tyre on the rear. Alternatively, if you were riding a trail centre, adding more pressure to even these sticky tyres would probably help quite a lot too. I think a follow-up video on what difference pick and mixing your tyres makes, or maybe even seeing if I can make these tyres roll as fast as these ones by pumping them up loads, that might be quite an interesting idea. If you want to see that, let us know in the comments down below, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, plus the latest on all things Merida.